Guys, how's it going? So I was just watching this video on YouTube, and I'm always leery of anyone who's paying, to be on YouTube, advertisements and everything, because Satan often puts his own, even though they look like sheep, they're really wolves. And so I think sometimes the church doesn't really understand the term legalism, and they actually end up calling God's laws, like wanting to follow God's laws and following God's laws, legalism. And I was speaking to, I guess, a sister the day before yesterday, and I had told her, I was like, I don't eat pork because I gave her my testimony of being sick, and God had literally flipped open the Bible to the food laws, and after I removed the pork from my diet, I stopped being sick. And so, and it was like her eyes, like they got all wide, and she just kept saying, Jesus came to fulfill the law, and there's only 2 laws, and I'm like trying to calm her down a bit, because she's talking about she's free, but then she's also going off. I don't think people understand the concept of freedom. He says if you're free, then you're free indeed. It's literally feel free in your spirit. The depression and anxiety, and you're disease free, and your mind is clear, like you feel it. And so that's why he says when the Son sets you free, you're free indeed. But you can do like lip service and talk about you're free and you're not, just because you're repeating scripture. Everything's spiritual. And so, I said a lot of people say that they're free, but they're not truly free because they're bogged down with other things. I don't know. And she kind of like ignored me from there on. And I'm like, if you're really free, you wouldn't be ignoring me as your sister. But I had went in on that, and I'm always getting in these conversations with Christians that think the law is done away with and call it legalism, like I said. But the legalism was actually because these Hebrews were being oppressed under Jewish law, as well as being oppressed under the law of sin and death, which means the transgression of God's law, which leads to death. And even in Hebrews it says sin begets death, like that hasn't changed. But if you're following Christ, you are also following the law of God, because Christ is the completion of the law, the end of the law. It doesn't mean that he ended the law. He said, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So when the day of Christ comes, he fulfills the law of God in us. He is the perfect combination between God and man. Like when we're one with God, but you cannot be one with God and be lawless. And so, some of the things they say don't make sense. But I just watched this advertisement, and this gentleman was saying, Jesus came to free us from legalism. And he said it about 3 times, but he didn't really explain what it meant. And so I'm just saying the legalism was concerning the Jewish law. That's why when the Pharisees had asked, they said, why don't your disciples wash their hands before they eat? It wasn't pertaining to food, even though there are versions that put, so he made all foods clean in parentheses, which means if it's in parentheses, it means it was added later on. And so it wasn't there initially. So they were asking, why don't your disciples wash their hands? And he said, it's not what goes in the belly, it's what comes out. And so this hand washing was part of the rituals that quote unquote made people clean. But, hand washing only goes so far. If your heart is unclean, if your heart is heavy and full of wickedness, and your hands are unclean in the sense that you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing, because your hands represent your works. He called their works like filthy rags, not because everything we do is filthy rags, but because they were literally doing evil things at that time. They were lawless. And so they were under the oppression of being lawless and under the oppression of the legalism of the Jewish law, which is not God's law again. And so, of course, your works will be dirty at some time because it comes out of your heart. But, yeah, so he didn't really explain what it meant, and then he didn't explain the part where, Yeshua also came to free us from the law of sin and death too. And so what I'm trying to get at is Christians need to understand he writes the law in our hearts and our minds. That is the new covenant. It's the law written on the hearts and minds of Judah. So, to say that, oh, he fulfilled the law and he did all that for us, it's true, but Christ in you would make you fulfill the law as well. If you don't have Christ in you, then you're not going to fulfill the law. And if you're not fulfilling the law, then you don't really have Christ in you. So, something to consider. Have a good one. Bye.